Hello and welcome to assignment number 4 of Dracula. Today we are going to meet old Mr. Swales. Mr. Swales is a very colloquial character. In other words, he's going to speak out of his very thick dialect known to this region. It makes it seem a little more real, but it also makes it very difficult to understand him. I'm going to do my best and just plow through his dialogue. Some of it I have no idea what the heck he's saying, but we really just want to get the gist of what he's saying will be enough. So we are on page 93 on the digital version of Dracula for assignment number 4, and I'm going to be reading for 10 or 15 minutes, of course, but you will want to read until page 126 to get to your last question for assignment number 4. So let me begin. Page 93, assignment number 4. He is a funny old man. He must be awfully old, for his face is gnarled and twisted like the bark of a tree. He tells me that he is nearly 100 and that he was a sailor in the Greensland fishing fleet when Waterloo was fought. He is, I'm afraid, a very skeptical person, for when I asked him about the bells at sea and the White Lady at the Abbey, he said very brusquely, "I wouldn't fash myself about them, miss. Them things be all wore out. Mind, I don't say that they never was, but I do say that they wasn't in my time. They be all very well for my comers and trippers and the like, but not for a nice young lady like you. Them feet folks from York and Leeds that be always eating cured herrings and drinking tea and looking out to buy cheap jet would creed off. I wonder myself who'd be bothered telling lies to them, even the newspapers, which is full of fool talk." I thought he'd be a good person to learn interesting things from, so I asked him if he would mind telling me something about the whale fishing in the old days. He was just setting himself to begin when the clock struck 6, whereupon he labored to get up and said, "I must gang a greenwards home now, miss. My granddaughter doesn't like to be kept waiting when the tea is ready, for it takes me time to crammel about the greaves, for there be many of them, and miss, I lack belly timber sorely by the clock." He hobbled away, and I could see him hurrying as well as he could down the steps. The steps are a great feature on the place. They lead from the town to the church. There are hundreds of them. I do not know how many, and they wind up in a delicate curve. The slope is so gentle that a horse could easily walk up and down them. I think they must originally have had something to do with the Abbey. I shall go home too. Lucy went out visiting with her mother, and as they were only duty calls, I did not go. August 1st. I came here an hour ago with Lucy, and we had a most interesting talk with my old friend and the 2 others who always come and join him. He is evidently the Sir Oracle of them, and I should think must have been in his time a most dictatorial person. He will not admit anything and faces down everybody. And down faces everybody. If he can't out-argue them, he bullies them, and he takes their silence for agreement with his views. Lucy was looking sweetly pretty in her white lawn frock. She has got a beautiful color since she has been here. I noticed that the old... That's an interesting statement. She has got a beautiful color since she has been here. Notice that. I'm just pointing it out. So she's got a lot of, the sunlight and whatnot gives her a lot of color in her face and whatnot. That'll be interesting later. I'm going to be quiet now. I noticed that the old men did not lose any time in coming and sitting near her when we sat down. She is so sweet with old people. I think they all fell in love with her on the spot. Even my old man succumbed and did not contradict her, but gave me double share instead. I got him on the subject of the legends, and he went off at once into a sort of sermon. I must try to remember it and put it down. It'd be all fool talk, lock, stock, and barrel. That's what it be, and nowt else. These bannons wafts up by ghosts and barghists and bogles, and all anent them is only fit to set barns and dizzy women a bell therein. They be not but air blebs. They all grims and signs and warnings be all invented by parsons and ilsome burk bodies and railway couters to skeer and scunner halflings and to get folks to do something that they don't other inclined to do. It makes me earful to think of them. Why it's them that, not content with printing lies on paper and preaching them out of pulpits, does want to be cutting them on the tombstones. Look here, all you in there, art ye will. All them steens holding up their heads as well as they can get out of their pride is a cant, simply tumbling down with the weight of the lies wrote on them. Here lies the body, or sacred to the memory, wrote on all of them, and yet in nigh half of them there ain't been no bodies at all, and the memory of them been cared a pinch of snuff about, much less sacred. Lies, all of them, nothing but lies of one kind or another. My God, but it'll be a square scatterment at the day of judgment when they come tumbling up in their death sarks, all juped together and trying to drag their tombstones with them to prove how good they was, some of them trimming and dithering with their hands that dozent and slippery from lying in the sea, that they can't even keep their grip of them. I could see from the old fellow's self-satisfied air and the way in which he looked around for the approval of his cronies that he was showing off, so I put in a word to keep him going. "Oh, Mr. Swales, you can't be serious. Surely these tombstones are not all wrong." "Yablins! There may be a poorish few not wrong, saving where they make out the people too good. For there be folk that do think a bomb bowl be like the sea, if only it be their own. The whole thing be only lies. Now look you here. You come here a stranger, and you seize the Kirk's Garth. I nodded, for I thought I better to assent, though I did not quite understand his dialect. I knew it had something to do with the church. He went on, and you can't say that all these steens be a boon folk that be happed here, snod and snog? I assented again, and that be just where the lies come in. Why, there be scores of these lay beds that be tomb as old duns, black box on Friday night. He nudged one of the companions, and they all laughed. And my God, how could they be otherwise? Look at that one. The afters, the Bart, the beer bank, read it. I went over and I read. Edward Spencelog, master mariner, murdered by pirates off the coast of Andres, April 1854, age 30. When I came back, Mr. Swales went on. Who brought him home? I wonder, to have him here? Murdered off the coast of Andres, and you conceded his body lay under. Why, I could name you a dozen whose bones lie in the Greenland seas above. He pointed northwards, or where the currents may have drifted them. There be the steens around ye. You can, with your young eyes, read the small print of the lies from here. This Braithwaite Lowry, I knew his father, lost in the lively off Greenland in 20. Or Andrew Woodhouse, drowned in the same seas in 77. Or John Paxton, drowned off Cape Farewell a year later. Or old John Rawlins, whose grandfather sailed with me, drowned in the Gulf of Finland in 50. Do you think that all these men will have to make a rush to Whitby when the trumpet sounds? I have me antherems abooted. I tell you that when they get here, they be jommeling and jostling one another that way. It'd be up like a fight up on the ice in the old days when we'd be at one another from daylight to dark and trying to tie our cuts up by the Aurora Borealis. This was evidently local pleasantry, for the old man cackled over it, and his cronies joined in with gusto. But I said, surely you are not quite correct, for you start on the assumption that all the poor people or their spirits will have to take their tombstones with them on the day of judgment. Do you think that will be really necessary? Well, what else they be tombstones for? Answer me that, miss. To please their relatives, I suppose. To please their relatives, you suppose? This he said with intense scorn. How will it pleasure their relatives to know that lies is wrote over them and that everybody in the place knows what they be lies? He pointed to a stone at our feet, which had been laid down as a slab on which the seat was rested, close to the edge of the cliff. Read the lies on that rough stone, he said. The letters were upside down for me where I sat, but Lucy was more opposite to them, so she leant over and read, Sacred of the memory of George Cannon, who died in the hope of a glorious resurrection on July 29th, 1873, falling from the rocks at Kettleness. This tomb was erected by his sorrowing mother to her dearly beloved son. He was the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. Really, Mr. Swales, I don't see anything funny in that. She spoke her comment very gravely and somewhat severely. You don't see aught funny? Ha-ha! But that's because he don't go. The sorrowing mother was a hellcat that hated him because he was a crust, a regular lammeter he was, and he hated her so that he committed suicide in order that she mightn't get an insurance she put on his life. He blew nigh on the top of his head off with an old musket that they had fought for scaring crows with. 'Twarn't for crows then, for it brought the clegs and the doubts to him. That's the way he fell off the rocks. And as to hopes of a glorious resurrection, I've often heard him myself say that he'd hoped he'd go to hell, for his mother was so pious that he'd be sure not to go to heaven, and he didn't want to addle where she was. Now, isn't that Steve? At any rate, he hammered it with a stick as he spoke, a pack of lies. And won't it make Gabriel cackle when Geordie comes panning down his degrees with the tombstone balanced on his hump, and asked if he took his evidence? Did not know what to say, but Lucy turned the conversation as she said, rising up, Oh, why did you tell us of this? It is my favorite seat, and I cannot leave it. And now I find I must go on sitting over the grave of a suicide? That won't harm ye, me pretty, and it may make poor Georgie gladsome to have so trim a lass sitting on his lap. That won't hurt ye. Why, I've sat here on and off for nigh 20 years past, and hasn't done me no harm. Don't ye fash about them as lies under ye here. That doesn't lie there either. It'll be time for you to be getting start when ye see the tombstones all run away with and the place as bare as a stubble field. There's the clock, and I must gang. My service to ye ladies. And off he hobbled. All right, just to explain to you what he basically just said there, all the tombstones are all lies. So what he's saying is that the names are, not that the names are lies, but what I get from this is that most of the tombs or the coffins in the dirt are empty because most of the people who died off at sea, either drowning or falling off cliffs and whatnot. So there are no bodies under there. Now, there's a metaphorical way to talk about with the tombstones that they're all lies. And he was saying that they were saying that they were good people and great people, because as that last evidence, he said this woman put lies on the tombstone. And old Mr. Swales is worried that he believes that when you die, there's later in the future, there's going to be this trumpet calling and all the dead people are going to get up pick up their tombstones as their evidence of the type of people that they were and bring them to, I don't know who he said it was going to judge them. And if they were good, they'd go to heaven. And if they were bad, they'd go to hell. And he's worried that because they're all lies, that they're gonna get in trouble because they're trying to get into heaven with lies on their tombs. I think it also has another meaning, or at least a metaphorical meaning for us, in that there is nobody in those tombs or those coffins, because Dracula is turning them, and at night they're leaving the coffins and they're eating people. I don't think old Mr. Swales knows about that. I think that's like a double meaning for us, the reader, to know. I'm going to shut up now and read a little bit longer. Lucy and I sat a while, and it was also beautiful before us that we took hands as we sat. And she told me all over again about Arthur and their coming marriage. That made me just a little heartsick, for I haven't heard from Jonathan for a whole month. The same day, I came up here alone, for I am very sad. There was no letter from me. I hope there cannot be anything the matter with Jonathan. The clock has just struck 9. I see the lights scattered all over the town, sometimes in rows where the streets are, and sometimes singly. They run right up the Esk and die away in the curve of the valley. To my left, the view is cut off by a black line of roof of the old house next to the abbey. The sheep and lambs are bleating in the fields away behind me, and there is a clatter of donkeys' hoofs up the paved road below. The band on the pier is playing a harsh waltz in good time, and further along the quay there is a Salvation Army meeting in a back street. Neither of the bands hear the other, but up here I hear and see them both. I wonder where Jonathan is, and is he thinking of me? I wish he were here. Dr. Seward's diary, June 5th. The case of Renfield grows more interesting the more I go to understand the man. He has certain qualities very largely developed: selfishness, secrecy, and purpose. I'm sorry, I lost my spot. There we go. I wish I could get at what is the object of the latter. He seems to have some settled scheme of his own, but what it is, I do not know. His redeeming quality is a love of animals, though indeed he has such a curious turn. It is that I sometimes imagine he is only abnormally cruel. His pets are of odd sorts. Just now his hobby is catching flies. He has at present such a quantity that I have had myself to expostulate. To my astonishment, he did not break out into a fury as I expected, but took the matter in simple seriousness. He thought for a moment and then said, "May I have 3 days? I shall clear them away." Of course I said that would do. I must watch him. 18th June. He has turned his mind now to spiders and has got several very big fellows in a box. He keeps feeding them as flies, and the number of the latter is becoming sensibly diminished, although he has used half his food in attracting more flies from outside to his room. July 1st. His spiders are now becoming a great nuisance as his flies, and today I've told him he must get rid of them. He looked very sad at this. So I said that he must, some of them at all events. He cheerfully acquiesced in this, and I gave him the same time as before for reduction. He disgusted me much while with him, for when a horrid bloated blowfly with some carrion food buzzed into the room, he caught it, held it exultantly for a few moments between his finger and thumb, and before I knew what he was going to do, he put it in his mouth and ate it. I scolded him for it, but he argued quietly that it was very good and very wholesome, that it was life, strong life, and gave life to him. This gave me an idea, or the rudiment one. I must watch how he gets rid of his spiders. He has evidently some deep problem in his mind, for he keeps a little notebook in which he's always jotting down something. Whole pages of it are filled with masses of figures, generally single numbers added up in batches, and then the totals added in batches again, as though he were focusing some account, as the auditors put it. July 8th. There is a method in his madness, and the rudimentary idea in my mind is growing. It will be a whole idea soon, and then, oh, unconscious celebration, you will have to give the wall to your conscious brother. I kept away from him, my friend, for a few days so that I might notice if there was any change. Things remain as they were, except that he has parted with some of his pets and got a new one. He has managed to get a sparrow and has already partially tamed it. His means of taming is simple, for already the spiders have diminished. Those that do remain, however, are well fed, for he still brings in the flies by tempting them with his food. July 19th. We are progressing. My friend is now a whole colony of sparrows, and his flies and spiders are almost obliterated. When I came in, he ran to me and said he wanted to ask me a great favor, a very, very great favor. And as he spoke, he fawned on me like a dog. I asked him what it was, and he said with a sort of rapture in his voice and bearing, a kitten, a nice little sleek, playful kitten that I can play with and teach and feed and feed and feed. I was not unprepared for this request, for I had noticed how his pets went on increasing in size and vivacity, but I did not care that his pretty family of tame sparrows should be wiped out in the same manner as the flies and spiders. So I said I would see about it and asked him if he would not rather have a cat than a kitten. His eagerness betrayed him as he answered, "Oh, yes, I would like a cat. I only asked for a kitten, lest you should refuse me a cat. No one would refuse me a kitten, would they?" I shook my head and said that at present I feared it would not be possible, that I would see about it. His face fell, and I could see a warning of danger in it, for there was a sudden fierce sidelong look which meant to kill him. The man is an undeveloped homicidal maniac. I shall test him with his present craving and see how well it will work out. Then I shall know more. 10 p.m. I visited him again and found him sitting in a corner brooding. When I came in here, he threw himself on his knees before me and implored me to let him have a cat, that his salvation depended upon it. I was firm, however, and told him that he should not have it, whereupon he went without a word and sat down, gnawing his fingers in the corners where I had found him. I shall see him in the morning early. July 20th. Visited Renfield very early before attendant went his rounds. Found him up and humming a tune. He was spreading out his sugar, which he had saved, in the window, and was manifestly beginning his fly catching again, and beginning it cheerfully and with a good grace. I looked around for his birds, and not seeing them, asked him where they were. He replied, without turning around, that they had all flown away. There were a few feathers about the room, and on his pillow a drop of blood. I said nothing, but went and told the keepers to report to me if there was anything odd about him during that day. 11 a.m. The attendant has just been to me to say that Renfield has been very sick and has disgorged a whole lot of feathers. My belief is, doctor, that he has eaten his birds and that he just took and ate them raw. 11 p.m. I gave Renfield a strong opiate tonight, enough to make him sleep, and took away his pocketbook to look at it. The thought that has been buzzing about my brain lately is complete, and the theory proved. My homicidal maniac is a peculiar kind. I shall have to invent a new classification for him and call him a zoophagus, a life-eating maniac. What he desires is to absorb as many lives as he can, and he has laid himself out to achieve it in a cumulative way. He gave many flies to one spider and many spiders to one bird, and then wanted a cat to eat the many birds. What would have been his later steps? It would almost be worth the while to complete the experiment. It might be done if there was only a sufficient cause. Men sneered at vivisection, and yet look at its results today. Why not advance science? It's its most difficult and vital aspect, the knowledge of the brain. Had I even the secret of one such mind, did I hold the key to the fancy of one lunatic, I might advance my own branch of science to a pitch compared with Burden Sanderson's physiology, or Ferrier's brain knowledge would be as nothing. If only there was a sufficient cause. I must not think too much of this, or I may be tempted. A good cause might turn the scale with me, for may not I too be of an exceptional brain, congenitally? How well the man reasoned. Lunatics always do within their own scope. I wonder at how many lives he values a man, or if only one. He has closed the account most accurately and today begun a new record. How many of us begin a new record with each day of our lives? To me, it seems only yesterday that my whole life ended with a new hope, and that truly I began a new record. So it shall be until the great recorder sums me up and closes my ledger account with a balance to profit or loss. Oh, Lucy, Lucy, I cannot be angry with you, nor can I be angry with my friend, whose happiness is yours. But I must only wait on hopeless and work. If I could have had a strong cause as my poor mad friend there, a good unselfish cause to make me work, that would indeed be happiness. All right, I'm going to stop there, everybody. I'm on the bottom of page 104. If you're on the online version, of course. It starts with Mina Murray's journal, and her first line of this paragraph that you'll continue on is 26 July. I am anxious, and it soothes me to express myself here. Enjoy the rest of assignment number 4, and have a great day.